Somebody else has to run the microphone around because I can't. Dick?
Hey. First, I want to say thanks. I really enjoyed that, and I especially appreciate you acknowledging that undermatching might not be a bad thing, which I think is something we don't hear very often. But to that end, I kind of wanted to highlight or ask some more questions to take that maybe further than even you'd want to. It sounds like you still wanted to say that undermatching does some harm, and I think if we think about real success, and I think Dick's question to maybe the first speaker brought up, or maybe it was the second speaker, brought up this idea that we don't just want to view success in terms of getting a certain job or having a certain income,
right,
but sort of whole lifestyle things. And I think if we look at it that way, it becomes far less clear that undermatching necessarily does undermine success. Also, I think time to degree was one of the things you mentioned. It's not at all clear to me that less time to degree is necessarily better, particularly if we're looking at the group of students who tend to engage in undermatching, who might be less prepared to make the life choices that we expect people to make as they exit college and things like that. Also, I think one of the things you mentioned is the significant benefit of being in an appropriately matched school or the most selective school for you. I think there's also a significant benefit to being a quote big fish. So I guess I just wanted to point those things out as things that might complicate this idea that undermatching is a bad thing. Admittedly speaking from the biased position of someone who seriously undermatched myself in my undergraduate education.
Yeah.
And then, no. I'm talking about my my early years, not now. You guys, yeah. And then the final thing I wanted to ask you, sorry, this is a totally separate thing, but was if you had any thoughts about overmatching. And what I have in mind here is these recent cases. What was the girl's name? Abigail Adams and those kinds of cases of, what I'm talking. Everyone knows what I'm talking about, right? These kinds of cases of middle class or upper middle class white students who don't get into very selective schools, and it turns out have kind of mediocre, good grades, but like mediocre grades and test scores, and then sue the schools because they think, of course, I would have gotten into this. So it's kind of the opposite thing. They think, of course, I can go to the Ivy Leagues, rather than actually I'm qualified for a good state school.
Yeah, good. So that I'll answer the second thing first, because my response to that is just that's not what I'm talking about. but no, it's important and interesting.
I ask because I think if you're concerned with the policy questions of the forces that cause it.
Yeah.
Is what you're talking about?
Yes, but I think the causes come from quite different directions. So with the students who are undermatching, the assumption in all the research is that they're minimally qualified we're considering students who are minimally qualified for certain institutions. And overmatching, that would require that they're not qualified for the institution that they're in. And so that raises first of all, the causes of that are totally different, right? Because a lot of that's happening because of positive social mechanisms that are putting them in that position. So I don't think the causes are the same. I don't think that saying anything about one of those problems will actually help you with the other problem. They should be investigated independently. So does undermatching, so one question I'll ask you is, how many of you guys undermatched? How many of you undermatched when you think about it, right? Like I really find this very interesting, because if I'm talking about this with scholars, that it's amazing how often they'll say like, oh, I totally did that. I applied to one college, I got into the one college that I applied to because it was a half hour from my parents' house. And that can be a cause of undermatching. You could have gotten a better school, but didn't because it was closer to home. So we're not always talking here about just wealth-based causes. So time to degree not being as bad, and does undermatching really do harm? So those were the two first things. Okay, so yes, so part of my point is that there are circumstances under which it looks like undermatching may not do harm. So there's you got to distinguish between two arguments here. One of them is, it would have to be undermatching. Cultural things can justify undermatching, right? That's one argument. And if that's the argument, then the thought is, well, it makes this decision that looks irrational into a rational decision. But you should sharply distinguish that from a different kind of argument, which I think is also hanging out in here, that it might be the case that even practically irrational decisions about your educational choices might be defensible if they're made under certain kinds of conditions. So we just admit that you're making a bad choice, but it's your choice, right? And that the difference between that and so is undermatching a prima facie harm? I think yeah, because it pretty clearly is related to welfare outcome harms. Is that the end of the story? No. Yeah, sorry.
First off, I think if undermatching comes from autonomous preferences, I'm still worried about the outcomes as a justice issue. I see what you're saying, but I think there's more there. Also, just on the data, the data are fascinating on undermatching, but what is really going on? So let me just put on a speculative social science hat for a second. Here's one. Remember, undermatching occurs at all socioeconomic status levels. So here's one plausible thing that I think that Bowen don't really take account of, but needs to be investigated. What's happening is some kids don't want to work hard in college, and they say I could go to Harvard or I could go to Schmarvard. I'll have to work harder if I go to Harvard. I want to go to Schmarvard, or same for any level. And that it's not that the hat makes that they go to this institution and then they adapt to the institution. The reason they're graduating at a lower rate is because you've got two groups: the ones who want to work hard and the ones who don't. And the ones who don't want to work hard don't graduate, or take longer to degree. So I think that's one. Yeah. I'd like to see whether that can be an autonomous preference. I don't want to work hard, but I'm still worried about it. And I think we ought to be teaching kids in school, especially in lower SES, to be more motivated. Right? So that's one thing. The second thing is, here's just a bit of data. Take the top 30 colleges, the most selective colleges. I remember looking at a pie chart once, which showed, if I'm getting it right, this is by income quintiles. The top 20%, people from the top 20% are overrepresented. They're not, a lot of kids who aren't qualified, but from the top income are getting in the most selective, the 20 or 30 most selective. But in the poor, in the bottom 20%, there's no undermatching. Or at least this is true. The percentage of kids that are qualified is about the same as the percentage of kids that go to the very top colleges in the United States, from the lowest income. Mm-hmm. And what's going on? Here's a guess. Again, speculative social science. I think in order to be motivated to go to a more demanding school rather than less, within your range, someone needs to suggest it to you, and especially some salient adults say, look, this is a good idea. Yeah. And for upper class kids or middle class kids, there's tons of salient adults, the guidance counselors, the parents, the brothers, the cousins, the grandmothers, everybody's leaning on it to go, but for poor kids who aren't, of the quality to go to the top 30 colleges, nobody ever suggests that. So they don't have the information, but especially they don't have a salient adult or a salient, person nudging them. And I think that's a justice fact. I think that's a justice issue. And so I think, two bits of data, is some of what's going on a motivational thing, across socioeconomic classes. And for if you're focused on the lowest socioeconomic class, there isn't undermatching as far as I know for the top 30 colleges. So, and I think the explanation of that is that if I'm in the lowest socioeconomic status and I'm qualified to go to Harvard, Harvard will contact me, or some colleges will send me brochures and guidance counselors will prick up their ears and say, why don't you apply to a fancy school? But if I'm qualified for Kansas or Schmanzas or something, I'm invisible. Nobody will suggest that. And my parents won't, and my grandmother.
So, no, that's good. I mean, the data thing, I don't know how to answer that because my sense about that, from what I've read, is that it's close to 40% undermatching even at the highest levels. Yeah, well, I guess. I mean, this is just, and mine's just most selective universities. I think you'd have to compare the two. Yeah, no, I agree that they're not the same. So I'd have to look at that and take a look at that, because that is significant, right, if that's true. But it might also be just that you're right, like they're better at getting matching. They're better at getting those students to come to that college, right? They're better at getting the information to them, and that schools that aren't as wealthy just don't have the resources to do that kind of thing. I'm nervous about the motivational thing, both because it seems like it calls on data that I don't have access to, We could do. We're guessing. But even so, it makes me nervous because I think people don't really know. Really, kids are good at guessing how good their skills are. I mean, you might be saying like there's a certain part of the population that's just lazy, right? And they just don't. They could go to college, but they'd rather just sit on the couch. Or you could be saying something like they're really good at judging whether or not they're going to have to work hard and do well at these colleges. And so they're really good at that, and they think, I'm extremely practically rational about the college decision. I know that it's going to be this amount of hard work, and I'm just really not into that. So I'm going to choose to not go to this college because that's a better use of my laziness or something. I don't think that people are that good at telling. They don't know enough about how good they are at succeeding in college. So that requires that kind of information. I just don't think they have it. But again, we're just guessing, right? Like I don't have any information about that. I like the point though about no information and no adult contact being unjust, and I agree with that. That's a potential site of injustice, and it's related to economic inequality. There are plenty of studies that show that access to counseling, comprehensive counseling, at low-income schools is dramatically different than it is at high-income schools. And one of my points was just that, like if you're surrounded by people who are going to go to college, and they're telling you all the time, like, we're going to college, we're going to college, we're going to college, you're going to get a very different sense about whether or not it's a good idea to go to college than if you're surrounded by a bunch of people who are sort of saying, like, it's not really worth my time.
Is your email the first initial of your first name and then your last name and then at UCSD?
Yeah, it is.
I'll send you an email and clear it all up for you. But
good.
I'll make two very quick reasons. I taught at a Korean school, an elite school where every applicant we accepted, we turned down 30. And I wrote all the admissions questions, I read all the admissions essays, and I admitted all of the students. And of the students, there were 93 who majored in English, 15 got into my alma mater, UC Berkeley, 2 to Harvard. And quite frankly, you're spinning your wheels because the Asians are coming, that's one thing. And the other thing was that this first speaker said she taught at Swarthmore, and then she taught at CCNY. Before World War II, there were 10 students at CCNY who went on to become Nobel Prize winners. CCNY deteriorated, and for different reasons, and some of them are quite obvious to you. When I went to Cal, I paid exactly the same tuition as my classmate, who I used to see at Top Dog all the time, and his name is Dick Bloom. He's on the Board of Regents. Last time I saw him was at the Regents meeting held here. I said, Dick, is it true that you own $700 million of for-profit college shares? He said, yes, but that was before I married Diane. The University of California is under attack, and one of the ways it's under attack is federal largesse. If you're an underachieving student who doesn't have good job prospects, of course you're going to take a Pell Grant. It's a pot of money. Unfortunately, you're also encumbered with a student loan, and you go to an inferior school like University of Phoenix, or the one here headquartered in San Diego, which advertises on the Super Bowl and on the Olympics. I've forgotten the name of it, Ashford University. But lots and lots of people take out those federal loans, and lots of people. That's why I'm saying the concept of parents not having gone to college is outmoded, because anyone who has access to a television, much less an iPad, goes to college nowadays. So those concepts don't exist, and the community colleges are being destroyed. And as I say, I'll send you an email.
Okay. Well, I'll just say that I had trouble tracking the question, but I take it as something like, at the very end there you were saying, well, everybody's aware of college, And so it just isn't true that people are undermatching or something, but that's just demonstrably false from the data. People, and it's very clearly tied to parental education, even now. And these are not like old statistics. This is in the last few years. So the rates are still very much tied to okay.
The last thing is that I checked on the endowment, and Philip Sexton this morning, it's over $1 billion. So I am thoughtful and congratulate you because your efforts are
All right. So somebody else. I saw that. Okay.
So I guess I wanted to follow up on something that, sorry, I don't know your name, this gentleman just brought up, but also Dick brought up. And that has to do with the relationship between parents and children in making these decisions. So I would say that I'm somebody who was undermatched, and it was not a reflection of my autonomous decision, and that my parents, and most college students' parents, ultimately are the ones who can constrain your choice or promote your choices. A college student doesn't automatically have, unless their parents have given it to them, or a potential college student, like a way to bankroll their education. And so if you are accepted, even with a significant amount of scholarships, to a selective university that is still double the price of the cheapest thing that's a half an hour from your home, your parents can refuse to co-sign on your loans. And so one of the only ways to intervene to respect, prospective college students' autonomy who, have chosen a school that they can't afford on their own without parents co-signing on their loans, is to allow them to make decisions without parents co-signing on their loans. But that has potential maybe I'm just asking a question that the answer is, well, I don't know how the hell we would fix that. But
That's the answer I give to lots of stuff. So, but I think yeah. So one thing you might be saying that's probably right is that there's a certain amount of undermatching here that is just strictly financial, right? It's not that they don't want to go to the college that they match to. It's not that they have some stronger reasons for staying home or something, but they just can't afford it. And their parents can't afford it, and so they just can't.
or just
do it.
don't agree because they don't have the background. So like this
Yeah.
gentleman was saying, this is just not, it's an outdated issue.
Right.
No, my parents just didn't see it as the correct
important.
value judgment to make, this kind of potential debt versus what you could get out
Yeah.
of it.
This is actually exactly, I think, what's happening in those cases to a great degree. Not all of them, but I think to a great degree. I think the other body of those cases is people saying, don't leave me. But these are, I'm not claiming, and I shouldn't be taken as claiming that I'm giving a kind of comprehensive explanation of undermatching, because I think that this phenomenon is it's new to us, but it's going to turn out to be 10 different things. And like right now, it's one thing, just because we don't understand it. But we're going to have to do research on, for example, gender inequalities within undermatching. We don't know about that. We know just about rates across students. I would be really interested in whether or not there are differences between people who, cultural and socioeconomic differences between people who undermatch one level of college and people who undermatch like several levels of college, or people who could go to a certain level of college and just don't apply. Because that seems to me like probably a different group of people who just aren't applying than people who are going to colleges that are less selective. So that stuff I just don't, yeah, I mean, it's all really interesting and I agree with that. I just don't have any data there.
Good job, Mike. So I seem to remember that the general question of your talk is undermatching morally problematic? And if I'm remembering you correctly, it felt like you were asking that mostly for lower socioeconomic groups. Is it morally problematic? So I'm wondering, is that the right read on your interest, and are you also interested in is it morally problematic for all groups? And I have a second question when you're ready.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, and one that I thought about when I first started writing this paper. And here's my take on that. Because the way that I'm approaching the issue is based on like basically an analysis on the notion of autonomy, then there's no reason why the concepts couldn't apply to high SES students as well. However, I think we have just straight up prioritarian reasons for not caring about them. They're going to be fine, right? And this maybe isn't super, people won't agree with this, but I think if we've got a limited pot of money, then, and the amount of undermatching is significantly higher at the low SES level, it's harder to fix for them, then we start there. So
That makes sense. So then to follow up with that, if we do grant you that it is morally problematic, are there ethical action items other than simply decreasing the lack of autonomy, or is there something else? For example, do we need to, for example, I'm thinking if you are an autonomous actor who might undermatch, do you have a greater ethical responsibility to choose a matched school? Because I guess I think if the only action item is decreasing autonomy for people, does that make this an easy discussion?
well, I don't think that we even are trying to minimize undermatching, absolutely. And I don't think that people have an obligation to go to the college that matches their ability level, like a moral obligation or anything like that. Even for low, yeah, sure. I mean, it's not a moral obligation. What I'm interested in is, I think what the moral problem, among the many moral problems with undermatching, is that I think there's a significant portion of students who are undermatching because they've come to believe that it's what they ought to do, and they've been made unaware of their opportunities, not purposefully in every case, but like often in ways that are unjust.
Let me see. How exactly do I want to? Is this we're discussing undermatching just in admissions, correct? Is this taking into account? Like I had a friend, she's an amazing artist, and she went to a state school because it had a particular degree. Animation was the degree. So is this discussion about undermatching, considering like, say she had an 800 on the SAT. I don't think she did, but say she had an 800 on the SAT. Is this her decision to go to a state school for this particular program that it has? Is the undermatching statistics taking this into consideration? Or is it just saying with her test score she should have gone to MIT?
Yeah, no, it's not yet. It's a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of questions that are in this ballpark that need to be taken up in future research. The data just doesn't exist. Like, absolutely. There's a big difference between somebody who decides to go to a less selective college because it's got the program that they want, and then somebody who goes to that same college because they don't believe that they're qualified to go to the college that they're actually qualified for. And I think that data is going to come out eventually, but part of what I'm trying to do here is say, undermatching presents a potential moral problem, and so it puts a demand on us to chase down certain kinds of research, things that would make that sort of distinction, so that, if at the end of the day it turns out that all cases of undermatching are just totally explainable in terms of that stuff, then I'll let it go, right? But so far I think that there's the potential for this serious moral harm, and I want to keep my eye on it.
I think we'll wrap things up.
Thanks. Hey, sure. Yeah, I really would like to thank everybody again for coming and spending the whole sunny day doing this with me. This has been a long time coming with this stuff that's dear to my heart, and I want to thank our speakers who were awesome. And Thanks to Don again for setting all this up, and come back next year because we're gonna do this again. We're gonna do the ethics in the public sphere again next year, and so you absolutely should attend that. You'll be very welcome. Thank you.